Okay. Let's go. Go.
Thank you, Carl. Greetings to all you brave souls that came out in person, and greetings to all the folks that are zooming in. I'm very pleased to be here, and am a expert on fasting since I read all this stuff so I could give this talk. Right? Pastor Carol and I were talking several months ago about this time and what we could do with this time, and she said, well, how about fasting? I thought, that sounds really interesting. And even though I have fasted historically, and I will tell you about that, I thought it'd be a great opportunity. It's been really fun and a great learning experience for me. So to begin, I want to start. It's always good to start with a really big slide. So I have a slide. This person, this quote, this guy is an internationally known spiritual leader and theologian. And I'm sure that you have all heard of him. It's Bob Dylan. Okay. And he says, everything is too full. So the movies, the television shows, even clothing and food. There isn't an item on the menu that doesn't have half a dozen adjectives in front of it all chosen to hit you in your socio-political, humanitarian, snobby foodie consuming spot. And he goes on to say, so enjoy your free-range, human-infused, and dusted heirloom reduction. Sometimes it's just better to have a BLT and be done with it. But that's part of what we'll be talking about is overconsumption, consumerism, and what we might be able to do about that. On a more truly theological perspective, Richard Foster says, and I think this is a really good question. You could be thinking about this. Why has the giving of money, for example, been unquestionably recognized as an element of Christian devotion and fasting so disputed? Certainly we have as much, if not more, evidence from the Bible for fasting as we have for giving. Perhaps in our affluent society, fasting involves a far greater sacrifice than giving. Let that soak in. Okay. So what I will be doing today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is fasting and give kind of like a working definition. I'll do a brief historical perspective, and then I'm going to talk about why. What are the benefits of fasting? And then what I think is the neatest part of the presentation is I got an opportunity. I interviewed a lady who lives in Durham, who's a Methodist, who's been fasting for 25 years. And I want to share parts of that interview with you. And then, being ever optimistic, I'm going to give you some considerations if you think you might want to be designing a fast, what kind of things to think about. And I'll end by talking about a fasting support group that we're going to put together for Lent. So if anybody might be interested in that. Now, I must start by saying, talk about fasting. You can talk about fasting from different things, but when we're talking about food and drink, it's very important that if you have any kind of medical issues, you need to sort those out with your medical professional. So that's the official disclaimer here. So what is fasting? Fasting is voluntarily giving up or refraining from doing something for a period of time. Historically, as I said, we tend to think about food or drink, but you can fast from other things. For example, newspaper, binge watching Netflix, cell phones, the internet, or dare I say shopping. Now, fasting is different from abstinence. It's kind of a gray line there, because fasting involves a higher cause, a greater motivation. And oftentimes abstinence is just following a rule that somebody else requested you do. Particularly in the Catholic tradition, historically, abstinence is no meat on Fridays during Lent. Okay, well, that could be fasting if you kind of get into it, or it could just be, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do what they say and not really have any personal ownership of it. So fasting, it's all about the cause, the motivation. Now, my favorite Mexican restaurant is in a strip mall not far from my house. And right next to it is a fitness center. And on the glass of the fitness center, big sign, ask us about fasting, intermittent fasting. And that is just switching, having a schedule and switching from fasting and eating. So for example, they have a 5-2 program where 2 days a week you skip lunch, but the other 5 you have lunch. Well, why do people do that? It's because actually there are benefits to your body from skipping a meal now and then. So intermittent fasting addresses health issues, things like weight loss, it can improve insulin levels, longevity, heart health, thinking, memory improvement. And these are items that have been validated. This came from Johns Hopkins. Okay, so that is out there. It can help that way. Fasting gives the body a rest. You rest from processed foods or from too much food. And it gives you a chance for restoration. It gives your body a chance to restore itself. Quoting from Thomas Ryan, it gives the body a chance to renew itself. It's a time in which the body burns its rubbish, like house cleaning for a day. So this is some of the benefits to the body from fasting. Now, religious fasting is done for spiritual purposes. Seneca, who lived in the time of Christ, said, by overloading the body with food, you strangle the soul and you render it less active. By overloading the body with food, you can strangle the soul. Simply stated, fasting is a way to dethrone King Stomach. And that's by Jenison Franklin, who is a evangelical preacher. In essence, it's like, who's in charge? Fasting is the most concrete, and I need to say this is a little complex quote here. Fasting is the most concrete of the physical and visually embodied spiritual disciplines. And its intersection of the physical and metaphysical produces a uniquely potent, perceptible, sense-surrounding effects that bridge the often too wide gap between the body and the soul. Fasting can help bridge that gap between your body and your soul. But what doesn't count? I love this quote. Seafood lovers who eat at Red Lobster on Fridays and pig out on deep fried calamari, or vegetarians who wouldn't be tempted to eat meat in any case, can hardly be considered to be fasting. That makes sense, right? Growing up, I grew up in Kansas, and people say, well, what are you giving up for Lent? And we say watermelon, because there was no watermelon during Lent in Kansas. Or as Ristow, the guy, the quote above, he says, what are you giving up for Lent? And he said, fasting. So let's look then at some historical perspectives. Fasting has been practiced since ancient times. Hippocrates, father of medicine, is known to have recommended food abstinence for certain conditions. That was in 5 BCE. Okay, so it's been around for 7,000 years that we know of. There are more than 70 references in the Bible to fasting. And virtually all the major religions include the practice of fasting. There are a few exceptions, but virtually all the major ones do. A sample of the religions that include fasting. Judaism, so Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. That's a day of fasting. In Islam, Ramadan. So it's from sun up till sunset. And I experienced this personally because my boss years ago was Muslim. And you could tell when it was Ramadan. He got a little edgy, right? That's a long time, and for a month. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, in addition to Lent, it's Wednesdays and Fridays, certain times. For the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's the first Sunday of each month where they fast. And there are fasts in Hinduism and Buddhism also. But what about some of our Christian traditions? We'll start with the Presbyterians because I know there's at least one in the room. The Ash Wednesday liturgy of the Presbyterian Church says, I quote, I invite you, therefore, in the name of Christ, to observe a holy Lent by self-examination, penitence, by prayer and fasting, love, and by reading and meditating on the Word of God. Right from the Presbyterian Church. Or John Calvin says, according to the needs of the times, and he was exhorting pastors there. Pastors should exhort the people either to fasting, or to solemn supplications, or to other acts of humility, repentance, and faith. So you have the founders here. And then I have some more things Calvin said. Basically had 3 reasons that he documented for fasting. 1, it's a personal spiritual discipline to control the appetites of the body. To try to get in control of your body. 2, preparation for prayer and meditation. Prepare for prayer. And that can either be in public, with a group, or private. And 3, is a way to do repentance before God and a testimony of our our reliance on God's provision and strength, either public or private. The Office of Theology and Worship, Presbyterian Church, says, just as the people of ancient Israel fasted to discern God's will and express their grief in times of war, famine, or natural disaster, we may observe special times of prayer and fasting in times of trouble and pain. So the Presbyterian Church, very clearly, all in on this. So what do the Methodists say? Well, let's start. John Wesley fasted from Thursday sundown until communion on Sunday. So the founder fasted. Wesley saw fasting and abstinence as ways to express sorrow for sin and penitence for overindulgence. And he thought it was, and talked about it, even more meaningful when it's combined with giving to the poor. Now, the United Methodist Church does not have an official guidance on how individuals should observe fasting or abstinence, and that's from the church's webpage. Methodists have never limited fasting to Lent. General rule states that fasting or abstinence are part of the ordinance of God upon which the Methodists are called to attend to as they are able. So again, Methodists support it. They don't tell you how to do it. Okay, so if you want to know how to do it, talk to the Catholics. They'll tell you. All right. This is from the USCCB. That's the bishops, the US bishops. And they say Ash Wednesday and Good Friday are obligatory days of fasting and abstinence for Catholics. You have to do it. You're supposed to do it. In addition, Fridays during Lent are obligatory days of abstinence. Talked earlier about giving up meat. Friday. This is said this rule is for members of the Latin Church. The norms on fasting are obligatory from the age 18 to 59. So they realize that if you're younger, probably need the nutrition. And if you're older, you probably have other issues going on, so you have to be careful about that. So they don't mandate it for those 2 groups. Since I fall in one of those groups, I'm not going to tell you which one. I'm comfortable with the church's position on that. Also, the church says for Lent, this is a 3-fold approach. It's fasting and prayer and almsgiving. So you can think of it as a triangle. Fasting, prayer, almsgiving. Why do this? Why would you do this? Okay. So I learned a new word. It's called body ecology. Do it because it's good for your body. And as I've mentioned, it can be a quick and easy weight loss. Now, if you don't study it, weight will come back on. We all know that. We tried diets. You can feel better physically and mentally. You can look better, feel younger. You can give your digestion system a rest. Allows you to clean out the body, like that earlier quote I had. You can lower your blood pressure, your cholesterol levels. If you're trying to cut down on smoking or drinking, that can help. Give your body a chance to heal itself. Slow the aging process. Additionally, it can relieve tension, independence on drugs, sleep better, digest food better, sharpen your senses, quicken your mental processes. So reasons for fasting, I've been talking now about the body ecology. There are some other reasons why people would fast. Save time. How much time do you spend cooking, cleaning up, shopping? An opportunity to share with those who have less, share with the hungry. So take the food that you would have eaten or the money you would have spent on food, and you can give it to those without. And also fasting sometimes is done to call attention to social issues. You know, about hunger fasts. It's happened every once in a while, get a lot of press. You do it for that. So we've talked about the two categories. Let's talk about more spiritual purposes. Start with the Bible. The big three. Elijah walks for 40 days and he fasts. Moses on Mount Sinai for 40 days. He comes down, they have the golden calf. He's down a day, he goes back up for 40 days. We have Jesus after his baptism. He goes into the wilderness. Yeah. Big example there. Well, what about some other examples of the Bible? And as I was putting the slide together, I realized my site on this came up. This is from the NIV Bible publishers that listed these. The one, it can strengthen your prayer, allow you to seek God's guidance, opportunity to express grief, seek deliverance or protection. These are all woven into different stories in the Bible. You can express repentance, sorrow for what you've done, show humility, minister to the needs of others.
So could you go back one slide? And I mean, I guess I could, sometimes I don't know how to get the handouts, but I just kind of want to linger in what you're sharing on that last slide, if you could, just a moment.
Why don't we do that when we're done?
Okay,
And or I'll get you a copy of the slides.
all
How would
right,
that be? So
sure.
great. And finally, you can express love and worship for God. And there are other reasons too. These are just kind of the big 10, if you will. So personally, your personal spiritual motivation, why would you do this? Well, this allows us to empty ourselves so you can be filled. Allows you to make a little space, if you will. Obviously, prepare for Easter. It's part of the Lent process. It gives an opportunity to participate in a small way in the suffering of others, and specifically Jesus this time of the year. Allows us to push back from consumerism and overabundance, like that Bob Dylan quote that we started with. It can be an opportunity to draw nearer to God in unforeseen ways. That in a minute. Allows you to intensify your prayer. Foster humility. Because we think we're in control of everything. What about, I'm in control of everything, but can I really give up the Starbucks? And allows us to build solidarity with those who routinely experience the shortages, which we are voluntarily. So now I want to talk about this wonderful interview I had with this lady. She's local to Durham. She's a Methodist. Started fasting 25 years ago. She's been fasting for 25 years. And the reason she started fasting, they moved to a new area. And that church or that area didn't have a Wednesday evening prayer service. So she thought, well, I'll just start fasting. So I asked her, so tell me about your routine. And she said, well, weekly for the last 25 years, no food from supper on Tuesday till breakfast on Thursday. I only drink water and tea. Okay, so it's no food and just water and tea. So, well, how do you do this? She said, well, to start, I start with a Bible verse. And I get quiet, and I move into a soul-touching space. That's a direct way. What benefits do you see? This is a quote. She says, I get to a very deep place with God. It's like peeling various layers of an onion. I use Bible verses and praying. I keep pushing until I'm listening, not talking. Pushing until I'm listening, not talking. I get an overwhelming peace, physical peace. It's like a mist envelops you and you feel you are where you need to be. God is there. Like a mist envelops you and you feel you are where you need to be. God is there. So, in my role as interviewer, all right, so what are the disadvantages? Okay, what's the other side? And this is what blew me away. She said, I don't know. I can't think of any. That most people don't know I do this. And if they do, they know it's okay to eat in front of me. Now, I don't have a separate slide on disadvantages. Well, certainly there are some disadvantages. We had, when we used to live in New Jersey, we were very good friends with another family, and they had a daughter the same age as one of our sons. And her favorite saying when we said, hey, they'd ask her, hey, would you do such and such? And she'd say, I don't want to. I think that's a very common feeling among us. Oh, why don't you do some fasting? I don't want to. So what advice? She knew I was going to do this presentation. What advice do you have for these folks? It says, again, quoting, it's going to be different than you thought. You can do this if you want to get closer to God. Going without food for a day is not a big deal. Going without food for a day is not a big deal. I schedule celebrations with food on other days. Just being smart about it. It may help also to develop a mantra. I'm going to talk to that in a moment. But just relax and let go of the tension in your heart, mind, and soul. That's her advice. Let go of the tension, heart, mind, and soul. I said, well, what do you do about the temptation? Because there will be temptation. What do you do about the temptation to break the fast? That it's harder when you first start. I no longer have hunger pains. In the beginning, the pains were a reminder to me to pray for those who were food deprived. Converted those pains into thinking about others. And she said, I knew I would eventually get something to eat. Well, there are others out there that don't have that opportunity. They don't have it to look forward to. I said, what final thoughts do you have? And she said, well, I encourage fasting. It'll put you in a place you have never been. Connection with the very deepest part of yourself in God. Why would you do this? It will put you in a place you have never been. Connection with the very deepest part of yourself and God. So I thanked her and I hung up the phone. And literally 60 seconds later, my phone rang and it was her. And she said, I have a final thought. I said, what's that? Be sure and tell the people to check with their doctor before starting anything. That might be a problem for some people's health. Okay. Again, so you've heard it twice now. It's potential medical things you need to check with your physician. I thought that was a fascinating opportunity for me to get to talk to this lady. So maybe you're thinking you may want to fast. So there's a couple ideas about designing a fast. First, consider someone with whom you could fast, kind of like a fast buddy, if you will, or group. There is support and accountability. If you know you're going to be talking to somebody, how's the fast going? That can kind of help when you get hunger pains or whatever it is you're fasting from. Decide, which leads into the second thing, decide upon the scope of the fast. What will you give up? Food, caloric drinks, TV, internet, shopping? Maybe some questions to help you think through that. So what's taking up a lot of your time? Are you on the computer and just randomly following all these rabbit trails? Okay. Where's your money being spent? The food treats, coffee drinks, shopping? What are your unhealthy habits? This may be a way to get past an unhealthy habit. And here I have this thing. If you have medical issues, you really need to talk to a health professional. Now I want to stop for 1 second and ask you a question. I've been messing with you, and you probably didn't realize it. You recognize this is the first time I put an image on. I've been fasting from images. Okay? Because when you give a presentation, you're supposed to have nice, slick images and this and that. And you can be truthful. How many of you noticed there were no images on the slides? Third thing to think about, decide how long and how often you want to fast. Just try one meal or try for 1 day a week, for X number of weeks, so that you have some kind of a framework. I'm going to do this for this amount of time. Step 4, commit your fast to a spiritual purpose. Pray. Pray for your success. Pray for new ways to draw closer to God. Open the door and ask God for guidance, guide. plan for what you will do after the fast. Are you going to set aside maybe more prayer time? Consider extending the time frame of the fast. Well, it's important to ease back into your old routine if you're going back there. Because if you say you fasted from caffeine and all of a sudden you're starting caffeine again and you're drinking as much as you did before you started, it can kind of upset you. So I have a little story about that. And my wife's already laughing. So many years ago, I decided to give up coffee for Lent. And as I thought about that, well, because this kind of gets the beginning of the day going. And I thought, well, what happens at the end of the day? And oftentimes you come home from work, have a glass of wine, have a cocktail. Well, I'll give up alcohol. I'll give up coffee and alcohol. I mean, how hard is that? So I did. It was rough for a few days, but we made it through Lent. So it's Easter. The service is over. We're at a restaurant. And so it's Janet and I, our two young sons at the time, my mom and dad, my sister, her husband, and their son. We're at the table. The waitress is going around taking drink orders. And she gets to me. What would you like? I want scotch and I want coffee. So Janet says, "Hi, can I say something?" So I'm getting ready to hear the, "Honey, it's not good to drink in front of the kids at noon." Sure. Please, go ahead. She said, "Will you promise me something?" So I'm getting, okay, I won't drink in front of the kids. Yeah, what's that? She said, "Promise me you'll never do that again." Evidently, it was even harder on her than it was on me. So it was only the beginning and the end of the day. Right? But the point there is, there may be other folks impacted by what you choose to do. So it'd be a good idea to touch base with them also. So some final thoughts about how do we stick with the plan? How do you stay with it? Every time you feel a hunger pain, reflect or pray about your purpose. Why am I doing this? Back into your consciousness. Stay away from the thing that you are fasting. In other words, stay out of the kitchen if it's food. Don't open the refrigerator and stick your head in there if you're trying to fast from food. Stay away from it. Make it simpler. Expect and dismiss what they call clockwork hunger pains. 5:30 every night, get hungry because we eat at 6. Okay? Expect that. That's going to happen. And as the lady I interviewed said, get some mantras when you're tempted. And these are just a few examples. Like, I'm the boss of my body. And does not live by bread alone. God, bring me closer. Jesus, I suffer with you. So again, it's like knowing you're going to be tempted, knowing the chance that you're really going to want to not do this, have something ready. It's like having some ammunition ready. And finally, remember, there are billions of people that are going without what you're going without, only they're not doing it voluntarily. There are billions of people in the world that are going without what you're doing. Not alone in that sense. So, we are starting a fasting support group here at the congregation. It'll be on Thursdays during Lent, 7 p.m. to 8. It's Zoom. There's no requirement. If we're done at 7:30, we'll be done. That's fine. Don't worry about that. If you can't make all Thursdays, don't worry about it. Participate when you can. It'll be from the 23rd of March through the 30th. That's 23rd of February through the 30th of March. So the rough agenda at this point in time, opening prayer. That first session, we'll share what we're going to fast about. What we will fast. From then on, we'll kind of check in. How's it going? What learnings have you had that would potentially benefit others? How would you like to share that? Are there questions that you have for the group? How do you handle this? What do you think about that? What, and most importantly, what spiritual insights came from this? In a situation like the lady I interviewed, you're in a very different place with God. And then we'll end with a closing prayer. So, to conclude, question, are you too full now? Like our friend Bob Dylan, are you too full? Something that you could maybe pass on to make some space, space for God, make an opportunity to deepen that relationship. So question is fasting an option for you for Lent? I think we have some.
Yes, I know patience. So I'll get back to the.
Now you want to? That part?
Yeah, we can open it up for.
And so what questions do you have? Either in the room or on Zoom? And if you're on Zoom, if you can raise your hand. Some of you on Zoom, your picture is not showing, it's just your name. So if you have a question, you'd have to look the other way. Again?
You recommend spouses fasting together?
How should I answer that, honey? My spouse is in the room. I recommend that it is better if there's someone you can fast with. Spouse, that's kind of the dynamics of the relationship there, and it would certainly have to be a point where both spouses were buying into it. Don't want to kind of lay it on a spouse and, well, I'm doing it, so you have to do it, kind of thing. And what do you think, Ken?
I was just thinking in regard to food, it'd be a lot easier, right?
Yeah,
Most people in
true.
a household. Yes.
Did you all hear that okay on the Zoom? The question was, do you recommend spouses fasting together? And part of where Ken was coming from was that certainly make it easier relative to food. And if you were going to prepare a meal or not prepare a meal, things like that. And part of my response was it's important that both spouses really buy into it and that it not be forced on one spouse. Yeah.
Mark, I think the woman you interviewed, her husband did not fast.
Okay.
Does not fast.
So Carol just shared the woman I interviewed, her husband does not fast. Questions? Yes, in the back there, sir. The question was, there's many references in the Bible to fasting.
Yeah, and then closer to God level, what type of changes?
Yeah. So what types of changes could you expect getting closer to God? First of all, I don't know the answer to your question, but I have some thoughts, which never stopped me from answering questions before. Okay. The part of our perspective is that have a self-communicating God. We have a God that communicates with us. And also we have a God that reaches us where we are. We are unique. And God's response to each person, that person, although there can be similarities between that. If I look back to the lady I interviewed, for her, she kind of felt this mist that surrounded her, and she felt a deeper presence of God. How it might roll out for you or me, I don't know, but the literature all says it is a way to deepen that relationship with God. So it kind of depends where we're at this point in time. But the expectation is certainly by the end of Lent, you may be deeper in your relationship with God. And also you may be closer in relationship to Jesus and the suffering that he went through, that of suffering that you'll be going through. I have several highly trained people in the room. Anybody would like to add to that? Yeah, please.
I'm not highly trained. I just think the scripture, I just am grateful for how God, as you said, reveals himself when we draw near to him. And I think it's just a posturing. I read a book years ago in a small group. It was a Richard Foster celebration of the discipline.
Yeah.
And we went through week by week disciplines of some on service, some on praise, and some on fasting. So one week we did, fasting, and I like that idea of in community. And I just was hearkening back to the Isaiah passage where God sort of says through the prophet Isaiah, like, what is this fast? You're doing it, kind of for showy reasons or this or that. This is the fast that really brings me honor. And God says, about, loosening the bonds of wickedness and the thongs of the yoke, letting oppressed go free. And as this passage continues, it's interesting that God says, then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. And it goes on talking about the presence of God being righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. And interestingly, in this process of practicing fasting, God chose to help me experience some personal healing and growth that was pretty significant and profound. And I'm very grateful that that happened to happen in this process of fasting. Other times that I've done it, I have to be careful because I don't know any women in the room, but we can get a little conscious about our bodies and dieting too much. And I decided that I wanted to be very careful not to fast for weight loss. And so I would do periodically, this is in different seasons of my life, maybe once a month, like on a Friday, like less busy work-wise, and have a fairly big lunch, skip dinner, and move into whatever. So bottom line is, it still could be very meaningful. And sometimes I find that what she said, the envelope of the mist, just sensing God's presence. And sometimes little things will happen in the course of the day that you just have a sense that I call it sort of God sightings, where you feel God's presence. So that's
Thank you for the question. Thank you for a wonderful
Sure.
answer. Yeah. Please.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is, God says to be still and know that I am with you. Be still and know that I'm here. And that stillness doesn't necessarily just involve external movement, but internal movement of body. That was the thing that came to my mind, because your entire body becomes somewhat still when you're not in the process of continually digesting.
Great insight. Thank you. Yes, in the back row.
It's not a question, it's an anecdote. And
Can you speak just a skosh louder so that people can hear you?
louder, all right. Can you hear me all right? Kristen, can you hear me?
Yeah, they say.
We do have mics in this.
Okay, great.
Hey, that's not a question, it's more of an anecdote. And I think it's sort of a sign of the times that the leading candidate for the movie of the year is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And I've watched it 3 times, and it's a great movie. And we hark back to that song by the Eagles, Life in the Fast Lane, everything, all the time. The day before Christmas, a large loblolly pine knocked down the power lines near my house. And my whole house went black. And it stayed that way, and the house cooled off. And I lit candles, and I spent the day before Christmas Eve sitting up reading a book published by one of the Duke Div folks on calligraphy, St. John's Gospel. And it was enlightening, no pun, good stuff. The next day, I attended Christmas Eve service, and to walk from total darkness, no heat, no electricity, into Duke Chapel let me be open to much more than I usually would, doing things in a routine way. Like it's Sunday, I'm going to church, I'm going to forum. So it did offer me that, if you're hungry, all of a sudden there is food, whether it's spiritual or whatever, you have that. And I was going to go someplace else with that, but no, I mean, the next day, but when I came in, I noticed all the time in my house, blinking lights everywhere. Things, fans going, this and that, and the other thing. So what would it be like to turn off the mains now and then and get quiet? So just an
Great
example.
example. Yeah. Questions? Comments?
Someone in the chat maybe wrote something.
Click on the chat.
Cindy raised her hand. She
Oh.
just unmuted.
Cindy, go ahead, you're on mute.
I was just thinking, Mark, about in the discernment rules with Saint Ignatius, that there are clearly rules for fasting that Ignatius talked about, and that's certainly broadened to what's called the use of anodynes. And those rules spiritually encourage us to notice what it is we are attached to, over attached to, and that we need to develop some indifference toward. And I find those helpful. I find that perspective helpful because it connects into the examine every day. You know, what was I attached to today? What am I over attached to? What am I finding that is so necessary that's replacing dependence on God?
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, Ignatius talks about being too attached to things. That can be basically lead to a lack of freedom, a lack of religious freedom. So you're not actually able to choose what you want, choose what God wants, because we're sometimes too attached. When I heard, I'm from Kansas City, and our church service was at 11. And every once in a while, the Chiefs would play football at 12. And so after, and at that point in time, the church we went to did not have communion every week. Big thing, they passed the communion plate, and then there was a stream of people that followed the communion plate out of the sanctuary. They had to get home to watch the Chiefs. Maybe there was a little improper attachment there, if you think about it. Okay, we had a question on the chat, and it says, growing up Catholic, there was always the argument to ask if Sunday counted. Sunday counted for fasting during Lent. And the question is, do the Protestants feel the same way? So I'll throw that out here. Because it was kind of almost church specific, but there were churches I was in, and all bets were off on Sunday. So you could break the fast on Sunday.
Traditionally, Sunday has always been a feast day. I just have to say, Mark, that the feast days for me are a lot more fun.
That's great. Thank you for that insight. So I don't know a specific answer to that. When I had some Protestant churches I was in, Sunday counted, some didn't count. So it's kind of all over the board as best I can tell. Other questions?
If you're trying to be quantitative and Lent is 40 days, well, if you count the number of days between Ash Wednesday and Easter, Sundays don't count, right?
That's correct.
Thanks, Nelson.
I have a question.
Sure.
Sorry that I was a little late for class. If this fasting period that we're going to do together, we're not looking at daily for 40 days, are we?
The fasting support group,
Yeah.
totally voluntary.
Okay.
Okay. And what each person chooses to fast from is totally up to that person. So it could be, I'm going to fast on Wednesdays. Or you may pick something. I am not going to get on the internet and just roam around. You may want, that could be it.
Yeah, that could be a daily.
Yeah, but yeah, and there's no expectation that, no grades, okay? It's just an opportunity for us to come together and support each other.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, in the back row.
I have a question. I study health informatics, so I thought I should contribute from that perspective. There's an app called Zero, and just in case anybody interested, you start to track your fasting.
Would you repeat the app?
Zero.
Zero?
Yeah. Zero.
Okay. So if you couldn't hear it, there's an app called Zero, and you can use that to track your fasting, right? Thank you. All right, Carl, I think we're there.
All right.
Thank you so much for zooming in. Thank you so much for coming out in the weather. And I'll be around here if you have any other questions. Yes, please.
What is if you wanted to do the support group?
Yeah.
And it's Zoom, how do we latch into that?
Okay, the e-bulletin,
Oh, okay.
there's a link in there.
Oh, perfect. Thank
Talks
you.
about it and you just hit the link and it goes right to the Zoom.
Thank you. I didn't
Yeah.
notice that. Thank you.
Okay. And if any of you did not get that material, just email me. It's markshaw91@gmail. And I'll make sure that you get that link.
Great. As we do here every week, we will come off of mute, and in here we will thank Mark for presenting to us today. Lent is not far away, not at all. Next week, Reverend Dr. Christian Wilson will present to us a talk on the Christian Old Testament. Is there. Thank you all for being with us, and see you next week. And I'll leave this open here. I'm going to turn the recording off, but if anyone wants to